Hi, I'm Joel Westheimer, and I'm the education columnist for CBC Radio, and I'm also a University Research Chair in Democracy and Education at the University of Ottawa. I really want people to think about the ways that education is a public good, and that it's a public good that's essential for a democratic society. In other words, public education is not just about training for career or career preparation, and it's not just about individual achievement, but that it actually has a role as fostering the kinds of citizens that democratic society requires. Right? There can't be one unified story in democratic discourse because democracy is about competing ideals and competing perspectives, because dissent is the engine of progress in any democratic society. So when we say, for example, let's keep politics out of school, it's because we have this weird vision of politics that, like, politics is a dirty word, right? The second thing that I hope people take away from what we talked about today is that the standardization and accountability movement has been, if not in intention, in result, an all-out attack on both teacher professionalism and on the goals that I just mentioned. Many teachers would echo the sentiments of Gloria, a teacher in a recent study I conducted of the 10th grade civics curriculum in Ontario. She told us this is Gloria speaking. "In my 22 years of teaching, never have I experienced a climate that has turned all educational problems into problems of measurement until now. Poor citizenship skills? Raise their math and literacy scores. Poor participation? Doesn't matter. Poverty? Inequality? The solution is always to give the students more tests. These days, pedagogically, I feel like I can't breathe." I want to say that I don't want people left with, and I hope they weren't left with, a sense of doom and gloom, but rather that there is the possibility for change, and there is, because we're witnessing it right now through massive opt-out movements throughout the United States, beginning in Canada, and a growing mobilization against a kind of neoliberal education agenda that reduces teaching and learning to the acquisition of facts, rather than the idea of developing a moral sensibility and convictions and the ability to stand up for those convictions. What does it mean to educate people for the common good? And that's a great question. I think that we throw that word common good around a lot, and we don't always know exactly what it means. What I mean by it is that the idea that public education is not just for the education of each individual child, like thinking my child is going to get this out of the public education system. It's also about thinking about what kind of society we want to live in, like what kind of education should all children get, and how is that education going to help our society as a whole advance. And one of the things I think that came out in our discussions today is that critical thinking and dissent is an important component of an education society. It's the engine of progress in most education societies, because if you don't have dissent, you don't have movement. And democracy requires movement, analysis, critique to advance and to improve. And so when we talk about education for the common good, I'm talking about education that gives people the tools and the abilities to work collectively with one another to improve society. What roles do universities play in the task of civic education? You know, universities traditionally, as much as public schools, had this idea of an educated citizenry, right? That the idea of a university education was not just professional training, although that too, but the idea that a broadly educated public would be better for democratic societies and enable a kind of intellectual life to flourish. They've lost some of that mission. You know, in the US we had the idea of land grant institutions. In Canada there's similar ideas of kind of the public domain of universities. And universities are essential for fostering that kind of civic mission, because it's in particular in preparation for professional life that we need to think about how our professional identity interweaves with our public identity and our social identity in helping to improve society. So I don't care if you're studying to become a social activist or a businessman or a biologist or a scientist or a French teacher. All of those things have a dual agenda. One is the specific and narrow goals of that particular career, sometimes narrow, and the other is how that career fits in to a broader idea of a democratic and educated citizenry. And universities really should be the leaders in that agenda, and some still are, and some are struggling to be that, but too many have given up the idea of the common good and the public good and instead turned to the idea that universities should be career training institutions. And that is incredibly short-sighted in my eyes.